Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. My name is Leslie, and today we're going to discuss The Fire This Time, edited by Jesmyn Ward. This is a collection, but it's not just short stories. Some material in here is memoir-like. It's poetry. What else? I don't want to forget. And they're curated into 3 sections. The first section is called Legacy, and that's a look at American history. And the second part is called Reckoning, which is talking about present day issues. And lastly is the third part, which is Jubilee, which looks to the future. What I love about this collection is that I'm introduced to all these writers that I either have not heard of or have heard of, but either way, I don't think I've read anything by these authors. And a name that sticks out for me, not just Jesmyn Ward, I want to read whatever she's written. I see her stuff come up all the time when I'm looking on other platforms, but also Isabel Wilkerson is a name that sticks out for me. But there are other people on this list of writers that I'm just not familiar with, and every single author in here really wrote some very powerful, intimate stories that make me want to read all their other work. So I'll say that. So right off the bat, you know that that I love reading this. What else do I want to say? I don't want to say too much about anything beforehand. That's just going to be like a very short review, which is just that I like this collection. It's worth the reading. I like the structure of this, looking at the past, present, and future. And it is called The Fire This Time, so it is a nod to James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And in the 2 letters that James Baldwin wrote, the structure is hitting all those beats, right? It's talking about the past, the present, and the future, because the author was writing to his nephew. And I like that this is the takeaway from Jesmyn Ward's editing, is that that's the way she wanted to frame this book. I thought that was really a beautiful nod, talking about how do I say it, like topics of race in America. And so the other thing is, because it's framed this way, it's not just like this book is in conversation with James Baldwin's work. It's involved with what continues to go on. And so yeah, it was beautifully written. There's some stories that really like hit hard. Up till the very last sentence of a story, you're just like really impacted, and that can only be done with these incredible writers. So this is definitely worth a read. I think this is also a book that you could read every year and still find connections to, and things are still gonna be pulled out from a reader that maybe they didn't notice the first time around. So yeah, much like The Fire Next Time. So I recommend this. And so for the spoiler chat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pick out a story from each one that stood out to me. I think there's going to be 4. I was trying to stick to one of each section. But one of the sections, I think Legacy, just had 2 that I really loved. So I'll just briefly comment on them, and then I'll leave it at that. So like I said, the first section is Legacy, and it's focusing on the past. And so there's The Wait. I don't know why I'm looking at my notes when I have the answer right here. By Rachel Gansa. And I bring this up very briefly because she actually writes about the fact that she went to Paris, France, I could be wrong, but I felt like it was like for an internship or something like that. And so she happened to be a person that was not well versed with James Baldwin's work, and I think she just had this like preconceived notion about James Baldwin. But when she was actually there and experiencing Paris, all that she thought she realized was like incorrect, and reflects on how James Baldwin was just a person that was trying to get away and survive, like many immigrants do at points, right? They're just trying to seek a better life for themselves. And it was that framing and the way that she wrote that that really touched me. And she also explains how at this place, I don't know if it's called an internship, I think I'm using the wrong word, she did have some very like odd interactions that were, I don't know how to say this, maybe racially motivated, or just treated, she just like ran into these really like, to say the least, some awkward instances. And so with that said, she also sees how much Baldwin made off of some of his work, which wasn't a lot. She even was able to visit his home where he wrote his work, which was a very teeny tiny spot that was to be torn down. And I think she just saw how much of a little life he lived in comparison to, let's say, some white writers that are also revered, because James Baldwin is revered, and how those authors will have their places considered like a historical place and will be well preserved. But here's an author that's not going to be revered in that way and is having his home torn down, and how that could be also very much racially motivated. So I mean, I really appreciated that she wrote that, and it was also just really sad because now that I'm on this journey this month, reading 6 books I think by James Baldwin, I really do think that he's spoiled other works for me. I've said in a previous video that now the bar is set so high and no one's gonna hit that bar, you know, and it's unfortunate that he is just not that revered as this particular author is pointing out. So yeah, that I really love that story, and that stood out to me. And that's a great example of someone reflecting on the past, right? And how it affects her in current times. And so that was the additional one, I think, that I wanted to talk about because I just thought it was so touching. And also is directly about James Baldwin and not just the author. And then there's this other one. This is the one that I originally chose to talk about, legacy. And it's called Lonely in America. I'll tell you the author's name right now. By Wendy S. Walters. And so the author talks about how she feels disconnected to her own ancestors, and she finds out about these unearthed, segregated cemeteries that existed. And so she goes to travel to this cemetery because she's looking for a connection, because she doesn't really feel that connection, and how she starts doing research for that very same thing. And she talks about very specifically, she brings up like this disconnection that she feels, but also reflecting on what she thought America was versus what it is. And when this story takes place, it's around a Bush administration, when the Iraq War was happening. But what also stood out to me in this particular story was how, when the author was doing research about these segregated burial sites, how when she would communicate with librarians, they were worried about how the author was going to portray the material, and it almost seems like she would talk to people and they would want to water down the truth, or I think the term is like whitewash the truth, and just change the language. For instance, instead of calling someone like an enslaved person or someone in slavery, they would like change the words to servant, which I think is still, I immediately go on and think about someone that was enslaved, but how the language is used in a way, because people in present day don't want to be like associated with what happened in the past, but it's burying the past, right? And yeah, it's a good thing about what you want when it comes to that, but that's like, how could you want to do that? I don't know. It's frustrating. Anyways, but what I enjoyed about this author was they're saying how they had all this research and how they didn't want to lose it. And so she writes something that I felt was symbolically powerful. And she wrote, I think I'm just going to read the whole paragraph. I was going to cut it kind of short, but I'll read the whole paragraph. Because I was worried that I would lose track of the archaeologist's report among the bills, magazines, and student papers that littered my desk for many months, I kept it beside my bed, on the floor beneath my nightstand. Each morning the radio woke me with news of the war, a pop star's addiction, dismal predictions for the American economy. Later, I put the report in my backpack, its pages flat against my spine. At some point, I am not sure when, I grew accustomed to its weight and stopped noticing I was carrying it around. And I thought it was so powerful. And I think it speaks to the disconnection that she talks about throughout the book. And I know that the author titled this story Lonely in America, but I also felt like an apt word would be depressed, because when a person's depressed, one of the symptoms could be like not feeling connected to one's own emotions, like not being able to tap in. And I felt like that was also relevant within the conversation, and that this story also taps into what James Baldwin was saying in The Fire Next Time, which is that as long as you know yourself, you're not lost. And with what the author is writing here, is that America created a system where there's a people that will always feel lost because white supremacy and the American system are trying to make sure that history is lost. And so I thought that was really, really powerful that the author wrote that. And that's just for the section of legacy, because I love this collection so much. And then the author, I'm trying to think about which one I should talk about for The Reckoning, which is part 2. I marked Quarries of Unrest, but I don't even really remember that one. So let's take a peek, because I'm not gonna remember. All right, so for part 2, which is Reckoning, there's a poem and it's called Quarries of Unrest by Clint Smith. And I'm trying to stop myself from reading the whole thing because it's a very short poem. It's only 2 pages long. It's very short. And what stood out to me is that he's talking about his own existence being his own person against how he is perceived as a person and what a person or a white person will tell him he is. So there's that being put in a box. And also, as he's writing the poem, he's writing it in this meta way where he's then referencing how the poem itself will be perceived. And I really love that. And during the last section, he writes, the only part I'm going to read because I'm going to make a reference to something else. He writes, maybe that's why I'm always running from the things that love me. Maybe I'm trying to save them the time of burrowing darkness when all they have to do is close their eyes. And so that's very painful to express, that someone is acknowledging that they're going to push away love because of how the world treats them, puts them in a box, tells them who they are. And that just immediately reminded me of reading Beloved, because in Beloved there is this connection to realizing that there's two characters that connect in that book, and they connect in a way because they acknowledge that they haven't let themselves open up and love people that they actually love very much, but they know that if they really let themselves love another person, they're setting themselves up to love someone that's going to experience so much pain, suffering, and most likely ending with that character being murdered. And so it's like in Beloved, they're talking about slavery and how there's even this enslavement of love. There's this freedom taking away to even love someone. And so I thought that when I was reading this poem, that spoke to that same sentiment that was written into Beloved. But this author wrote this poem, and in 2 pages he expresses that really beautifully. And so that's what stuck out to me for the section called The Reckoning. And oh, there we go. Everything's falling all over the place. But I will bring up one more, since that was a poem and that's kind of short. There's, what is it called? There's a short story. It's kind of like a memoir. It's called Black and Blue. And I think the author's name is Garnett. I'll look that up right now. Yeah, Black and Blue by Garnett Cadogan. And it's on 129. And so what the author talks about is that from a very young age, he developed this love of going for walks. The author is Jamaican, so I bring that up because he talks about growing up in Jamaica and how as he got older at night, he would go for walks, and his family would just warn him, hey, just be careful because you're going out at night for a walk. It's just something that he loves, so he wants to continue to do. And I believe it's when the author lands in America, I can't remember which state. I don't want to make any guesses because he mentions a couple of different states that he was in. One of them was New York, and I think New Orleans, I believe, where once there was that shift of leaving Jamaica and being a black man in America, the framing of him going for a walk changed. When he was with his family in Jamaica, he was told, be careful. But now that he's in America, be careful is completely different, because it's not about making sure that he's safe from some nefarious danger in the dark. It's more about how Americans will see him as a villain, as a culprit, as someone to be scared of because he's a black man walking in the dark. And so that was just an important story to hear, because we're not just hearing someone talk from a purely American experience. This is someone that's not from America and then coming into America and experiencing like American racism. Not that it doesn't exist anywhere else, but it's like a very specific framing, and I really appreciated the story, and I'm just glad that he wrote it. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know if I have anything that's a particular quote from him, because so much of his story stood out to me. Oh, and one other thing that the author did point out that I didn't want to forget to mention, but he just expresses that being Jamaican, his parents didn't have like the talk with him that Black American children get from a young age. And so that when he was college level, young adult in America, he had to navigate that all on his own. For instance, if he was reprimanded by the police, he needed to take out his college ID card and show that, just trying to use a tactic of like separating himself. Yeah, it's a lot that the author has to navigate just to exist, just to do something of leisure. And I think this also speaks to, what was it? I'll just say it just speaks to having safe spaces, and how any space should be safe for everyone, but that's just not the case. And yeah, anyways, so I enjoyed that one. And so for the last section, which is called, I should know this by now, I just read it now. Jubilee, right? The last section is called Jubilee. Okay, here it is. I'll talk about notes on love and revolution. Let's see. All right, this far, Notes on Love and Revolution by Daniel Jose Older. He writes a letter that his, I don't know if it's his wife or a significant other, wants him to write to their future children, but instead he writes it to his partner, and basically just has all their fears bottled up about bringing life into America. That's such an oppressive lens to live through, and that really hit me hard, how there's like this hesitation to live what the author and their spouse sees as a fulfilling life because racism. And so the author goes on to write, I'm trying to think about which one I should share. The author goes on to write, "You can't tiptoe toward justice. You can't walk up to the door all polite and knock once or twice, hoping someone's home. Justice is a door that, when closed, must be kicked open." And I really liked how the author goes on to write, "Even on the left, even in this age of exposed racial rifts, politicians still say with a straight face that this country was founded on principles of equality." And it goes on and on, but I just thought that letter was so powerful. I'm sorry, that's my chair making noise. And like every single essay or poem or memoir adjacent work really just was very touching and powerful, and I enjoyed it, and I wish I had something better to say because I love this so much, to express what a great work this is to read, but I really just don't think I have all the words. Anyways, so that'll be it for this review, for this book chat. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts about The Fire this time if you've read it, or if there's any other work that you think is a nod to James Baldwin's work that I haven't read. I'm here for it. I'll totally want to read it. And that's it. I guess I'll talk to you later.